September 11, 2022, CBS News reported that there was going to be a deal made by the Biden administration to the Guantanamo Five of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Wali bin Attash, Ammar al-Baluchi, and Mustafa al-Hassawi, the five men who are alleged to have orchestrated and gave logistical and financial support to the September 11th attackers and to the plot itself. And today there's been an update on the story, but let's go back to that article that was written by CBS News. You can see September 11, 2022, five Guantanamo prisoners accused in 9/11 attacks could get plea deals. Let's read this for a bit. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11, CBS News has confirmed that military prosecutors and attorneys for five defendants charged for their roles in the attacks are negotiating potential plea deals that could take the death penalty off the table, keep the detention camp at the military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, open for the foreseeable future. Their cases have stalled over access to CIA evidence, and more recently, delays caused by the COVID pandemic. Most likely, it's CIA evidence. We won't know what evidence they have unless this goes to trial. This is the fear. The fear is that if there is no trial, we won't know for the next 30, 40, 50 years what the government had and what they didn't have. That's even more important. The chief defendant is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-described architect of 9/11. The four other defendants are Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Mustafa al-Hassawi, Wali bin Attash, and Ammar al-Baluchi, also known as Abdulaziz Ali. This is the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Possibility of a plea deal has angered the families of some 9/11 victims, including Deborah Burlingame, whose brother, pilot Charles Burlingame, was killed when al-Qaeda terrorists took over his plane, Flight 77, and crashed in Pentagon. We didn't have remains for weeks at Burlingame. We were constantly saying to each other, what would Chick want? What would Chick do? It was a nickname of our husband, our brother. The families are outraged, she said, at the possibility of plea deals. They don't want closures. They want justice. Right. Another group, 9/11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, in which I interviewed one of the co-founders, Elizabeth Miller, has said that a guilty plea and agreement not to appeal that sentence would be partly in recognition of the torture each of the defendants experienced and bring some measure of judicial finality. Okay. Now, this is the article that came out today on August 17th, 2023. Pentagon considering plea deals for defendants in 9/11 attacks. The suspected mastermind of September 11, 2001 that killed nearly 3,000 people could escape the death penalty, along with four of his accused plotters under a plea agreement being considered, CBS News has learned. The Pentagon sent a letter this week to families of 9/11 victims revealing plea deals are being considered in which the five men, including the suspected mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, would accept criminal responsibility for their actions and plead guilty in exchange for not receiving the death penalty. The letter generated fresh outrage in Christian Breitweiser, whose husband died in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. She had waited years to see the five men face trial. It's more heartbroken, Breitweiser told CBS News. I thought I lived in the United States of America. Thought we were a nation based upon the rule of law, and obviously, it's turned out not to be the case. Not only that, Kristen, unfortunately, the U.S. government is allied with Saudi Arabia and are keeping them from being civil sued at the Southern District of New York by the law firms Creedler and Motley Rice, who are representing the victims' families. The five 9/11 defendants were held by the CIA before being transferred to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in 2006. Prosecution of defendants at Guantanamo Bay, which would be held in military tribunals, has been delayed for years, mainly complicated by the CIA's interrogation of suspects that critics call torture, or in the government's terms, enhanced interrogation techniques. Questions of whether the evidence extracted during those interrogations is admissible in court. No, it's not. We went to war based on torture. A lot of people don't realize that the information that was led to the Iraq War, most of it came from the tortured detainee, Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, who was captured and sent to Egypt to be tortured on behalf of the CIA in regards to his forced confession, which came from torture, about how the Ba'athist regime in Iraq were procuring chemical and biological weapons with Al Qaeda. Later on, when the war was approved unanimously, they went back because they found out that this information was never verified. And he said, "Why'd you lie to us?" He said, "I told you anything to stop the torture." So, even though I believe Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is guilty, that he did plan 9/11, and that this operation came from the Bajenka plot, in which he was the co-mastermind of, that's where the ideas for the planes came from, we won't know it until it comes out in court. And this is the reason why they don't want you to know it, because they always want you to think that maybe they did it or maybe not. They don't want you knowing they did it or not. Because if they didn't do it, who did? Right? Prosecution of the defendants of Guantanamo Bay, which would be held in military tribunals, has been delayed for years, mainly complicated by the CIA's interrogation of the suspects at critical torture and questions over whether the evidence extracted during those interrogations is admissible in court. A defense lawyer for Ammar al-Baluchi, one of the accused plotters, told CBS News last year that a plea deal would end the impasse. He's willing to plead guilty, serve a long sentence at Guantanamo in exchange for medical care for his torture, and taking the death penalty off the table, defense lawyer James Connell said in September 2022. That doesn't satisfy Brad Blakeman, who lost his nephew Tommy Yergin in the World Trade Center. We were told, we were promised that we would bring these people responsible to justice, and we expect that to happen, Blakeman said. If the plea deal goes ahead and the 9/11 defendants get lengthy sentences, there's a law in place that prevents their transfer to U.S. soil and federal custody. That means the Guantanamo prison can remain open indefinitely. That's even worse. Over the years, there have been proposals to move the trials from military tribunals to civilian court. However, that idea has faced strong resistance in Congress over concerns about security and the cost of moving defendants out of Guantanamo Bay, which is bullshit anyway. What they didn't want was to go to a federal court because they would have a speedy trial, which they're a right to, and also all the evidence would have to be seen. And I don't think the U.S. government has all the evidence. Not only that, the evidence that they got from was from torture. You know, this is the problem with the federal government, and why I tell you people not to vote. We're run by criminals. Criminals are not just in Guantanamo Bay, they're here in Congress. And they're working against the wishes of the American people, the 9/11 victims' families. I'll use the example. Why is the U.S. federal government and the FBI, the Department of Justice, covering up Saudi financing of certain hijackers involved with the planes operation? Don't they supposed to serve the best interests of the people? Well, the best interests of the 9/11 victims' families are not being granted. They're not even being entertained. In fact, there's a huge, massive cover-up involving the Department of State, the Department of Justice, and the Foreign Intelligence Services of the General Intelligence Directorate, that's Saudi Arabia, and the Mossad of Israel, as well as the NSA, CIA, and afterwards the cover-up involving the FBI regarding Saudi, financing and logistical support given through Saudi contacts inside the United States that are affiliated with the government to the hijackers. And let's not forget that the former U.S. Saudi ambassador to the United States under Reagan, Clinton, and both Bush administrations, Bandar bin Sultan, who we found out later through Operation Encore, that the FBI Operation Encore, that his wife, Haifa bin Faisal, had been using their account at Riggs Bank to give money to a woman named Mouida Douijak, who is the wife of Osama Basnan, who's a radical fundamentalist who knew some of the hijackers and gave that money to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi while they were living in San Diego, here in the United States, under the protection of Saudi and CIA. I'm not saying the Saudis and CIA are involved with 9/11, but they were monitoring Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi in the years 2000, 2001, without ever telling the Department of State or the Department of Justice. Why? I just interviewed the former head of Alex Station, the Bin Laden Issue Station, Michael Scheuer, in which he says that the FBI are to blame for 9/11, that they stole information out of Alex Station. Well, if that was the case, why couldn't they stop 9/11? The CIA had this information regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Osby. They were told not to share it with the FBI. And that order came from the director, George Tenet. Even when the CIA had met with New York, Washington headquarters agents in New York, in Washington, D.C., with Steve Bongard and Dina Corsi, a CIA analyst named Clark Shannon had pictures of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Osby while they were attending an al-Qaeda summit meeting, but that wasn't known to the FBI regarding the photographs. And when he showed the photographs to these people, at first meeting, they didn't tell them their names. Second meeting, he finally told them, yeah, that's Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Osby. But what he didn't tell them, they were inside the United States. That was known to the CIA. The FBI had no idea. So why was the CIA protecting these men, it seems? Why? Because through the Candace Trail documents, we find out that the CIA, along with the Saudi intelligence arm, were running an illegal covert operation inside the United States, monitoring these two men, wondering what they were doing here. Now, later on, if we believe Richard Clark, the head of the Counterterrorism National Security Council, he basically said the CIA was trying to recruit these men to find out what they knew about al-Qaeda. Now, that may well be the case. But the NSA heard all these phone calls. And nobody's talking about the NSA, the gold mine of all data, the gold mine of information. Never mind the Israelis and Saudi intelligence and what they collected. We'll never get that information because they're from countries that, not going to share this information with the U.S. And we're fine with it, by the way. Government's not pressuring them. But we can't pressure the NSA. Release the transcripts of the calls from the al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen, release the transcripts of the phone calls that you intercepted from bin Laden's satellite phone in the early 90s. And then we're talking, because then we'll know specifics and details. All right. That's the end of this video. That's the end of the update. Any more updates, as usual, I will report them without bias, without prejudice. Have a good weekend, everybody. See you in the next video.